In this video, we'll show how to properly hoop a cap onto the wide cap frame. And in doing so, we're going to use the cap stretcher here. Now, the stretcher is not directly involved in the sewing process. Its purpose is twofold. It's one, to hold the hoop in place, or the frame in place. So to accomplish that, there's two clamps right here at the 10 and 2 o'clock position, and also on the underside of it, you also have another spring clamp here at the 6 o'clock position. So there are corresponding holes in the cap hoop itself on the underside right here that those pegs will lock into. So we're going to slide that over the cap stretcher and let those pegs, spring-loaded pegs, fall in and lock the cap hoop in place. The other purpose of the stretcher is to give you a form to tighten the material of the cap against, to give you the perfect amount of fabric tension for when that's sewing. And also on the cap hoop itself, on the rear side, you have two clips that will hold the back of the material of the cap and pinch that in place to keep that tension as well. So I'll go ahead and put that in place and begin hooping our cap. We're going to use a standard medium profile ball cap that's made of brush twilled, so it'll sew out fairly nicely. And you want to try to look for caps with a reinforced buckram on the inner two panels if possible, if your project allows for that. And if you have a bill like this, you want to go ahead and flatten that out. As the shape of the cap system itself is a circle, a flat circle, so you want to make this the cap itself into a flat circle as well by taking the bend out of the bill. The other thing you want to do is also extend the sweatband. This is also very important, so you want to unfurl it as completely as possible before putting it on there. And finally, before we get a little bit actually hoop the cap itself, there's a centering tab with a red mark here. You want to align when you're placing the cap onto the hoop, the center of the cap, and there, if you have a 6-panel hat, you have a convenient center seam to align that seam with the red mark. And underneath all of that, we want to put our stabilizer. Only use tearaway stabilizer, don't use cutaway for hats. Cut to approximately the size of your design. In this case, we're just going to do a front. And if you want to, you can actually curve that. Since this is a curved surface here, we curve this and slide it underneath the tab. That holds on a little bit better and stays in place. Now we'll go ahead and slide the cap onto the cap stretcher, and we'll change our viewpoint here a little bit so you can see what we're trying to do directly onto the cap, putting the cap onto the cap hoop itself. So what you're focusing on here is that centering tab itself, and we want to slide the bill as far down as the centering tab. We don't want to have it go past that, so that's incorrect. We want to make sure that it only stops right there at the top of the bill, and we also want to make sure that that red center mark aligns with the other side of the bill with the center seam of the cap itself. The next thing to pay attention to is we're going to back out a little bit, and you want to see the strap that's going to be holding this in place. And this strap is going to go around the base of the cap and basically hold this material stretched up against this metal form. And that, again, that's really important. You want to get this properly tight so that it sews nice and smoothly on your embroidery machine. So to pre-tension this, one useful trick that you can do is grab at the bottom of the material of the cap and pull downwards with your hand, and that'll actually help tighten the material against the barrel shape of the stretcher. You also want to steer the seam of the cap at the base, and that seam is between the riser of the cap and the sweatband itself. Make sure your sweatband is still out. You want to steer that so that it meets the teeth of the strap here. So again, I'm holding and pulling downwards with my right hand, and with my left, while I'm pulling down, I'm creating a meeting point for the teeth of that strap, and I want to start those teeth into right onto the seam, and I want to hold that with my left hand so that it doesn't back out. I'm pushing upwards and against so that it's pushing, and notice I've also let go with my right hand. I don't have to hold the cap down anymore because the teeth are now holding that by gripping onto the seam. And we want to continue all the way around to the other side of the cap. So we really want to keep the pressure down, almost like you're closing a large Ziploc bag. And what we're doing is we're pushing the fabric flat and around by the action of the teeth gripping that. And finally, there's a catch where the end of the strap goes. And what we want to do is pre-position that catch. There's a little lock or a little tab on this ridge here like this. And here's our locking tab that we want to put our wire loop around. And we'll pause here and let go. The strap will stay in place. And we just want to check the alignment on the right side, the top, and then on the left side, making sure the teeth are on the seam. And again, we want to make sure that the material is nice and tight and pulled down. No wrinkles this way or on the other side. So once we think that's aligned, we can go ahead and tighten down our catch down here by the 5 o'clock position. You should feel a little bit of resistance, maybe even a medium grade of resistance, and that should actually pull the seam to the right a little bit. So make sure that if you've actually planted your seam and aligned it with a red mark, you can actually pre-position it a little bit to the left so that when we tighten this now, if that shifts to the right, you can actually see on camera that it is, just a little bit, that it stays aligned. All right, so that's in there nice and tight. And the last thing we're going to do is we'll put our clips in place. Now the nice thing about this cap stretcher is that there's a nice hinge right here that allows us to swivel that up so we can get to that more easily. And if you are not able to do that with yours, there's actually a 5mm hex screw that's on the inside of this barrel. Just take a 5mm hex wrench and remove it, and you'll be able to swivel that. Okay, and so now let's have a look at the clips on the rear. And we want to put them in place, and that's our last thing. Simply grab the material on the side and pull back against this post, pull it nice and tight, and you kind of want to pull upwards and back until the wrinkles are basically nice and flat, the material is nice and flat against the barrel of the stretcher, and simply push these locking clips in place. You can alternately use binder clips if you lose them. And then we'll do that for that side, and then again we'll do that again for the other side. Again, pulling up and back, pull the material up and back like so, and putting our clip in place. So now all we have to do is remove this off of the clamps. Remember, there's a 10 and 2 o'clock position and a 6 o'clock position clamp. So once we pop that loose, you can see our properly hooped ball cap that's ready to sew on your 1501 or your or another Happy embroidery machine.